with government, trying to set policy and direction for the industry. As you say, I've been co-chairing for 3 years. And prior to the pandemic, we'd had the sector deal, which was all about investing in innovation and different methods of design, greater use of digital systems, components and sub-assemblies and off-site manufacture. So investment in research one way or the other. All as part of the industrial strategy, which was the terminology that the government at that time was using. We were grappling with how do we engage with the whole industry, because let's be honest, it was a relatively small number of people. I think if you were being honest, you'd say not many people had heard of the CLC, and arguably, how relevant was it, if I'm honest? But then the world changed, and it's clearly an awful experience that we've all been through. But out of that did come an ability for the CLC to do something, step up, and I think earn a reputation.
I mean, the world did indeed change for everybody, and I'm sure everyone's got their own experiences of how they've got through all of that, both personally and from a business perspective. But how did you, as an organisation, pull together a coherent, because it looked coherent from where I'm sitting, pandemic response across the industry? Because as we know, it's a fragmented industry with many different component parts.
No, absolutely. So the year before, so that would have been 2019, it was clear that CLC, however many people you could get around the physical table, because that's how life worked, was never going to be representative sufficiently of the whole industry. So I had invited the leaders of about 20 entities or representative bodies typically to be an advisor to the CLC, and that was genuinely wanting advice, but also trying to spread the footprint and engagement with. And so the truth is, I got on the phone to people from that group, and we'd only met twice in 9 months or something, and said, are you interested in joining a call to talk about what we can do? Every single person said yes. I'm pretty sure, and we had an hour's conversation, and it was a telephone conference call. I'm pretty sure the very next day we had the next one, and just yesterday we had and that became the task force, the CLC task force. And just yesterday we had task force meeting 159. I've been blown away by the response and the commitment and the lack of ego and the selflessness that people on the task force displayed. If it was good for the industry, the right thing to do was get it out there. Let's not worry about whose logo's on it or whatever. It really was a heartwarming and stunning contribution from the people on the task force.
I mean, what's interesting as well is one of the things in our industry, people always say, well, the industry needs to talk with one voice. Yeah. And clearly, obviously unprecedented times, but through that pandemic and through the crisis, the industry did seem to talk to one voice. Surely there's some lessons there for the future, isn't there?
Massively so. I guess you could argue, well, why wasn't the CLC doing that pre-pandemic? And I think the truth is, I don't think we'd have got away with it. I don't think people we would have had the respect or the time or even the sort of understanding of the industry. But I think it's what we did in those early days. Quite clearly, you got to go back 18 months. There was confusion, there was fear. Mm-hmm. What are we supposed to do? It wasn't even clear the messaging from government about should construction carry on or not. And we had to make some pretty bold decisions that led to the issuing of the site operating procedures. Before that, we went through the safe shutdown procedure process, and then the site operating, and then the safe startup. And I think because we had the courage to put out clear and simple guidance that seemed to be the best that we could get hold of, because it wasn't totally clear from Public Health England, it wasn't totally clear what certain ministers were saying, but we did it. And that it clearly helped everyone. And I think that was the starting point for what I hear a lot more now, which is, what do the CLC say on this? I've also heard people from Treasury say that if they're seeing something that they never ever thought they'd see in their careers, which was a construction industry by and large talking with a single voice, and that's made a massive difference in terms of the relationship of industry with government as well.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I want to come on to that now. I mean, how did you find working with government and getting stuff done? Were you surprised at the collaboration and cooperation, and how can we build on that? You've already mentioned there's been an increased sort of understanding, awareness of government, of the industry speaking with us. How do we build on all of that? And what's your reflections on that experience?
So I wasn't surprised at the interaction with the Bays team. They've been incredible all the way throughout this. They're a good group of people led by Fergus Harradence, and so I wasn't surprised that they were effective and well connected and knowledgeable of the industry. I think it's a two-way street, isn't it? The more we spoke with one voice, and the more it looked to others that we did have the support of the industry and we could speak on behalf of the industry, the more that encouraged, I think, government and the construction minister to pay attention and take us seriously, and that's led to what we have now is a fairly standard piece. The construction minister joins our industry briefing calls on a regular basis. Now, that didn't used to happen. So I think that it is a two-way street, and I think both sides, if you like, can see that there is merit and value in this.
So, in terms of building on all of that, what are the CLC's plans sort of post-COVID in terms of ensuring that engagement with the industry continues, and I suppose as well, crucially, that it's actually listened to?
Yeah, I think it's a proper question. You may have heard me say before, running a coalition in wartime is one thing, running a coalition in peacetime it is a different challenge. But if you remember, back in the summer or early summer of last year, we produced the roadmap to recovery, and that was all about restart, reset, and reinvent, and that still stacks up and still makes sense. I'd like to think we're beyond the restart point. The reset was all about getting back on our feet and normalizing, running in parallel with the bigger future ambitions to really literally reinvent what we do. That's all still there and still relevant. And the way I look at the challenges that we have as an industry now, that they fall into two sets. There is the here and the now, and perhaps COVID itself is less of a here and now. And I'd like to think that whatever happens, we know how, as an industry, how to respond. But of course, we've got labor shortages, we've got driver shortages, and that's leading to the material shortages that we hear, across all the industries, as well as global construction material supply challenges. And then, of course, we've got Brexit and the CE marking and the concerns that has. So there's still a lot of here and now, and I think that, and we've got to deal with those, and we've got to understand here from the industry what we can do. And we've got to do everything we can in working with government and saying what we need to say. So that has to keep going. But I think our trick is to get out and above and beyond that and look further forward. And that's looking to the futures, the challenges that we had, let's be honest, pre-pandemic, which is the whole net zero piece. And we've got Construct Zero as the framework, if you like, that CLC has launched. We've got the whole building safety program, and we have legislation coming, and there's an awful lot we've got to do there. But we've got, in both of those cases, we've got the sort of program team and the advisory or challenge teams, depending on which of those, in place. And so I think we've got the structure of what we need to do, but we've got the whole skills piece. We've got how to specify, procure, deliver. I think the government playbook is a really important step in that direction. and then the themes that we had of if those are the things that we've got to achieve, then the enablers, the digital, the golden thread, data, systems of systems, and all of those things, they all make sense and they've all got to happen, along with the innovation and the offsite stuff. So that there is a huge amount to do in the future, and we've got to make sure we don't spend too much of our time just focusing on the next few months, because we could do that forever.
That's right. And it's interesting you mentioned a number of those challenges there, which, frankly, we could devote whole webinars to. And indeed, we are in 3 weeks' time when we're having our COP preview event on the 24th of September. But I just want to touch on COP for a minute, and then I want to get to the construction playbook, because I think that's a really important development, and one which obviously the CLC has been intimately involved with. We're just returning to COP, for a second, and the whole sustainability issue. How important do you think the infrastructure sector is in basically delivering some of those outcomes? Pretty crucial, I would imagine. And how do we ensure that we get the government to understand that?
So I think there's a number of pieces there. Let's go beyond infrastructure, just look at the whole built environment. If you look at it, what generates carbon? Well, it's energy, or materials. So we've got the whole built environment is made of things that have been built and things that consume energy. So whether that's water supplies or building or heating or cooling or roads or whatever. So most of what is causing the problem of outside of deforestation perhaps, but an awful lot of some 40, nearly 50% of the generators of carbon are from the built environment. So we've got a massive role in terms of addressing the stuff that's built that needs sorting out, and fundamentally changing what we build and how we build things in future. And I know the government understands that. You've only got to look at the maths. These are readily available figures from outfits like the CCC. So what we've done with Construct Zero is lay out, okay, well, this is practically here and now, this is what we can do. These are the bigger issues that we've got to get at. But again, the danger is if you say, well, yeah, that's 10, 15 years time, then you don't start. So we've, on purpose, with the performance framework with Construct Zero, we've got some very immediate things that we can all get on with. And that we're communicating clearly. I think we're putting a coherent structure to government. We've been very successful in securing a slot at COP26 as the CLC, which is another opportunity to show our capability and our understanding and our intent. So it's for us now to nail that and do a good job of telling our story. But actually, for me, that's a springboard to where do we take this industry going forward, and that is we've got to tell a much better story to children, to the public, to government, in terms of how important this industry is for the future.
I'm glad you mentioned that about the industry's sort of, I suppose, sales pitch, if you like, because we've already a few issues here, which to me are issues that particularly young people want to do something about. Climate change, we mentioned, the whole sustainability issue around that is of extreme importance, to young people. The whole digital piece as well. I just noticed in the news, we've got a press release of Infrastructure Intelligence this week about one of the leading clients in the UK. I think it was the new Highways England. Well, it's not called Highways England anymore, is it? And they're using before we came on air about Roma Amaral's excellent new book aimed at young people. I mean, we've almost had this conversation for years, but how can we make sure that people do see the industry as a modern, go-ahead, cutting-edge industry that's changing the world? I mean, you mentioned it was a task that CLC felt on its shoulders. What kind of things can you do about that? And how can you influence the industry?
So I think there's a number of components to this. The first is we've got to understand what our story is. And, you know, typically as constructors, as practical people, as engineers, or whatever role we have, if we're not careful, we can end up describing what we build and how we build it. And actually, that's not the point at all. The point is, what are we doing for society? So rather than come and work with concrete and steel and glass and all that stuff, we should, you know, our thinking should be, if you want to change the world, come and join this industry. Fundamentally different. We're not talking about the engineering or anything. We're talking about what most people, I think, believes important, which is making the world a better place. So we've got to get that bit. We've got to be able to we've got to have a coherent story. That story then, I think, has to translate to the various parts of the industry, because that means something quite different from a house repairer to someone building a massive piece of infrastructure. But we get that story tellable in the right way by everyone in the industry and in their own way, but as part of a joined up. And then I think we're onto something. And you know, you can't help but sort of look at the Army or the Navy's adverts on the television of born in so-and-so, made in the Royal Navy or whatever. That style of selling this industry, I think, is vital. And, you know, it's where we've got to start. And we have to attract the very best talent from around the world, unhindered by gender or race or any other kind of diversity, and we've got to sell.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because you know, that particular way of advertising, promoting the industry, because sadly I'm old enough to remember that old Dunlop advert from yesteryear. I don't know whether any of our viewers and listeners can remember it, and it was basically showing what they produce, and it had two tennis players playing tennis, and we won't get to the end of the advert because obviously they had to you know, hide people's you know, sort of naughty bits of work, but basically everything that, you know, they moved a little piece away each time. So the tennis racket went, the shoes went, everything went, the net went, because it was all about rubber and what it was made with and all that kind of stuff. And I'm really pleased to hear you say about change. You know, if you want to change the world, come and work in the construction industry. Yeah. I think we have to be much bolder, don't we, about how we sell the industry, because it changes people's lives, doesn't it?
But you know, the thing is, if we want to talk about a newfound confidence in the industry, I think that is part of why that's a more credible thing to say and to want to do now. But the truth is, the needs are so crystal clear, I think, in a way that they weren't to most people even the short few years ago. But I don't think there's many people that would dispute climate change and the need to respond. I don't think that people would dispute that technology is going to change how the world works. And there are a number of factors now that I think mean that it's undeniable. So it's not a case of dare we tell this story, it's a case of we have to tell this story. The imperative is, I just think, so much stronger.
Well, absolutely. And it's interesting, I mean, you didn't use the phrase, but we use it a lot at Infrastructure Intelligence, find it being mentioned increasingly about all the work that the industry does, and that social value. And I want to talk now about the Construction Playbook. You know, this essentially a guide to, I suppose, in many ways, changing completely the way the industry works, with very much an accent on value. And also, obviously, the government have got to come to the party on that. Can you just say a little bit about your thoughts on the Construction Playbook, what it is, and how effective do you think it'll be in changing behaviours across the industry?
Yeah, okay. So I think the playbook is a bold step by government. I like the way they went about it. Very inclusive, many sessions, and again, using a video conferencing technology without which it wouldn't have been effective. But listening to what people were saying, and then genuinely reflecting that in the contents of the playbook and the 14 separate principles. And underlying all of this is all common sense. There's nothing in there that you wouldn't look at and say, well, yeah, that's fine. It's just that we've not been in a habit of doing it. And this starts with clients and government departments or understanding what value means. And again, this isn't about I want one number school and looks like this. And if you start talking about outcomes and what is it we're trying to achieve, not again going back to this point of not describing what we build, but describing the impact that we want to have on society. It's a way better place to start, and then it allows the industry to bring imagination to, okay, well, if that's what we want to achieve, then we'll focus on that rather than simply stacking bits on top of each other. So it's very bold. They're explicitly saying that this is not about cost, it is about value, long-term whole life value, and it is about social value too. So it's a big step, and it's up for the industry to support government in delivering the whole thing.
Hi, Andy. Andy Walker's got some connection issues there at the minute. So I'll just ask you a question that's come through on the chat. It's from somebody called Peter McDermott. Were you disappointed that the Construction Playbook was silent on direct employment?
Yes. I don't think it's totally silent, but it's not as explicit as it could have been. There's no doubt in my mind that we need to see way more direct employment. We're never going to see the put aside the human mental health benefits of security of employment and proper protection for holidays and illness and stuff like that. But we're never going to see the levels of training and development if we don't have more direct employed people. So it is an important part. It was discussed. We recognize that perfect is probably the enemy of the good in terms of what's in the playbook, or actually what's in a lot of what CLC have done. And it's something that we know we're going to have to get back to and emphasize more going forward. So there's more to be done on that.
I just had an internet outage there, but we got back in and we managed to do it fairly seamlessly. Just on the playbook as well, what plans are there to make sure that is monitored going forward? And that actually some of those things that you said the industry hitherto hadn't got around to doing do actually get done?
So it was interesting when Cabinet Office when this was evolving and it was taking shape and you could see where it was going to go. And I'll be honest, I started getting quite encouraged that, yeah, a lot of what needed saying is in there. But the government were very explicit. To the extent that you are seeing government departments and government funded clients not following what this says, you've got to call it out. Equally, you've got to help them do the right things, and then you've got to respond in the spirit that was intended. So there was a recognition that we were probably all going to have to call each other out on things as we go forward. And I think it was that openness and
yeah,
the ability to say that was really important. But we've now got to do that.
Do you think some of the business associations, the trade associations out there, need to be a little bit bolder about calling out some of the, some of the behaviours as well? I know it can be difficult because you've got to think about clients and relationships and all the rest of it. But do you think that we should do that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, how many fair payment charters have we seen and pledges? The moment league tables were produced and made publicly available, and they may have not been scientifically rigorous, but nonetheless, the moment league tables of people's payment performance were out there, what did we see? Rapid and significant improvement. And it's got to happen. we can't, if we want to achieve the level of change that we know we have to achieve, we can't hang around, and we can't tolerate people who aren't on board. So for me, it's all part of it.
Okay, so a bolder approach then, really, and hopefully we'll see that going forward. I want to turn now to, you're someone who has led and been intimately involved in a number of mega projects. How do you think those are perceived by the public, and how can we use projects like that to collectively improve the reputation of the industry? Got any thoughts on that?
Well, you know, I guess I've always been on big projects, and it's always been a case of you're only as good as your last project. And, you know, and of course, the bigger the project, the higher the profile. And if they don't quite go according to plan, then it's very visible. And that is the nature. There's no point complaining about that. That's how it is. I think we go back to telling the story. And I think we've, at the very start of what we did on Tideway, we understood what we're doing. We're building a tunnel and we're taking the sewage out of the river. But that's not how we explain ourselves. We talk about reconnecting London and Londoners with the River Thames. It's a broader social benefit that we're trying to achieve. Yes, we're cleaning up a river, but as part of a process of improving a lost love affair, if you like, or a broken relationship of people with their environment. You know, it's London's largest public open space by you know, factor of 10 nearly, but we don't look at it that way. And so from the very beginning, I think you've got to be, and it goes back to the government playbook value thing. What actually is the social proposition here? What are we actually trying to achieve? And if we can get really clear on that, I think because this is about going forward, building support for the things that we do. And I think it starts there. And I think you've then got to be true to that. And you've got to mean it. And then you've got to show you mean it. And then ultimately, as you deliver the benefits and the changes that you set out to, it's much easier then to celebrate success, and it's much easier to build on we're building this because it's good for, not we're building this way, hey, look how clever we are. I think we've lost Andy again.
Hi, yes, unfortunately he's got some issues. It may well be sun affecting his connection, perhaps.
Yeah.
Just taking that theme a little bit further in terms of your the projects that you've been involved with, it's clear that what you was emphasizing there was this social value aspect. That is increasingly more and more becoming, dare I say, a buzzword, and there needs to be maybe something a bit more substantial than just a buzzword. How do you perceive that in the basis of what you was doing in your projects, and how can the CLC help to engender that so it's not just a buzzword?
So I think it's you've got to really understand what it is you're doing and the benefits, and you've got to be able to explain them. But a lot of them you've got to be able to measure as well. Not all of them. How do you measure a change of a relationship of someone with a river? Well, maybe you can't. Although I'm not so sure. But in terms of employment, local, national, there are a whole bunch of things that you can measure and you can report, and you can set ambitious targets. Diversity of employment, all sorts of things that are all part of that picture. And the value toolkit that was developed through the CLC is actually a very useful. It existed pre-playbook, but it fits very, very handily in with that value piece. So what does value mean to you? Because what it means to you on this endeavor, this school, this project, this infrastructure or whatever, could be very different to another. But nonetheless, here's a framework that allows you to put that together in a quantifiable way, because that's important. And it's possible. You've just got to appreciate, you've got to do it properly, and you've got to understand why you're doing it. And now I've lost you.
Sorry, it seems to me that given your involvement in the playbook, your strategic position across the industry, that the CLC does have quite an important role to play in teasing out some of these issues around around social value. I mean, we, as I said earlier, you know, a lot of the people that we're talking to at the minute are saying a lot about social value, but I think it's that definition of it. From what you were saying earlier, it should be just central to everything that we're actually doing. I mean, from your experience of working on some of these large mega projects, is that something that you have found easy to inculcate into the people who are working on those projects so that people do get that message?
You know, I remember 6-7 years ago when we were having the internal discussions with the people working on Tideway as to why did we feel as good as we did about what we do, yet we talk about decibels and tons and cubic meters, and why does how we feel not fit with the language we use? And we had lots and lots of conversations, and it got us to this reconnecting lost love affair. And but the moment we started having those kind of conversations, what was staggering was it made sense to everyone. And we're not blessed or, you know, gifted people. We're just human beings that have a broader sense of what's right and what's wrong and what's good. And it's been central to how we've seen what we do and how we are what we are, and how we want to behave and how we want to be seen and how we want to deliver. And it's been vital and productive for Tideway. And if I could go back and do it all again, I'd do exactly the same thing.
So in terms of, I mean, you spoke earlier on, and it was a memorable phrase, and I'm sure it'll end up on a headline somewhere when you said, if you want to change the world, then you need to be working in the construction sector. I mean, how is there a role for government to play here as well? I know it can't just, you know, give special measures and promote the industry above others, but do you think the government has a role to play when you consider how important the infrastructure sector is to the country's GDP and indeed its export effort as well?
So yeah, I do think the government has a role, but you know, that became the importance of the industry, if nothing else, became clear when it was all falling apart last year. What was one of the few sectors of the entire economy that was continuing to work and continuing to
absolutely construction, wasn't it?
And you know, and I heard stories of people, young people saying, I want to work in construction, and when asked why, they said job security. Now, hell, would somebody have said that 10 years ago? No. And so I think if for no other reason, the importance of the industry to the economy is clear now to government. And we've had, you know, for it's 10 years now, we've had governments that understand the importance of spending on infrastructure as a way of employing people, moving the economy, and that money spreading far and wide out beyond the construction industry. And so I think that's understood too. So I think it's an open door that we've got, and again, it is down to us to put the stories, put the arguments and the benefits to government. And the more ambitious, the more compelling, the more committed we can be, the easier. You know, government is made up of people too.
Yeah,
and they'll get it, you know, the same feeling and the same sense. So I think we have the door is ajar, at least. We have a reception there. It's up to us to run right through it.
And obviously part of that, as I suppose, the industry getting its own act together as well. And I just want to have one final question about the playbook before we start to wrap things up. And that is, what about the role of clients, both, I mean, obviously public sector clients and the government are intimately involved in that around the whole.
I think Andy's frozen again, but I know I can see where the question was going. So yes, so let's imagine a world where all government clients were following the principles of the playbook, and that was going very well. Well, I mean, that's fantastic news, and that's going to take years and a whole lot of hard work and cooperation. You've still got a private sector there. Now, I think the question is, so what are we going to do? Have two types of procurement? The publicly procured works are done in this way, and that's good. But then in the private sector, we're going to carry on doing the cheapest thing we can, and that doesn't stack up. You can't have in my view, two separate approaches. There are good value reasons why the government has done the playbook, and I think the private sector has to understand that and understand what's the equivalent for them. I don't see that. I don't see public and private are so different in their expectations. You know, Tideway, we're a private company, but we absolutely behave in the way that I think the playbook describes, and it's doable. It's not explicitly stated, but it's absolutely doable. You're on mute.
We were having some connectivity problems today, and I know from speaking to colleagues around the country, they've got some similar issues. So my apologies for that, and we'll get to sort of a conclusion in a second. I just don't want to risk the Wi-Fi any longer. It's the first time it's happened as well, typical. But anyway, just clearly we spoke earlier on about the relevance of the CLC, the fact that it played an absolutely pivotal role, key role during the course of the pandemic. How do you see that relevance and profile improving as we move forward, and where do you want to see the industry, let's say in the next 5 years, and CLC's role within that?
So I think the CLC's value has been clear to the industry and to the economy over the past 18 months. But when you look at the challenges, and as we're saying, the amount that the construction industry as a whole has to do to address the challenges that society faces, this industry has to work together. We are an ecosystem. You know, that became clear in the very early days of CLC. Doesn't matter whether you're doing the big infrastructure or whether you're doing a house repair. If you can't get people, you haven't got cash, and you can't get materials, and you can't do whatever it was you were doing. And we all had the same problem. And so we're all in this together. We are only going to get to where we need to get to if we learn from each other. And I think the challenge for the industry, and I think CLC, is to understand that, recognize this is a diverse industry, and there's never ever going to be such a thing as a single way of doing anything, or the right way. As I say, perfect enemy of the good and all that, but that's where we're going. That's what it can mean to this part of the sector, this part of the industry, whatever. So I think we've got a vital role. And what I would, 5 years time, what I want to see, what we need to see, is an industry that is seen in a very different way. I've heard, as you will have, for the 20, 30 years, look at the aero industry, look at the automotive. I want people in 5 years' time to be saying, look at the construction industry.
Well, I think that's a really good point to end on. But I just want to ask you, one further thing. What, and it's perhaps a slightly unfair question because I've not given a hint at it in advance. But what inspires you about this industry the most? What gives you that get up and go every morning that thinks, yes, I'm really pleased I work in this sector?
Well, it's always been because I've believed that what I've been doing is of value to society. I'm not just saying that. I mean, it goes right back to why did I want to be a civil engineer? Yeah, okay, I like building things, I like being outdoors, I like traveling, but as I know John Armitt said in your interview about harnessing the resources of nature for the benefit of humankind, and I think that's why most people do go into this business, because we're doing some good. Yes, you can see it, it's tangible and all the rest. But if you really, a lot of the vision and the social value just goes right back to what a number of civil engineers 200 years ago defined as the art of civil engineering. I don't think much has changed. It's an easy thing to feel good about if you're doing things you believe in.
Well, I think, that is something that I think we all need to recognize about the industry, because, at the end of the day, it does change people's lives and makes a massive difference as well to communities, around the country. I'd like to thank you, Andy, for your time this morning. Apologies for those little glitches on the Wi-Fi. I don't know whether it's something to do with with a lack of investment, or it's too hot. But apologies for that. I think, nevertheless, you've given us, a lot of food for thought to think about today, and we really appreciate your time. We look forward as well to hearing more from the CLC in the months and years ahead, and to continuing to promote the excellent work that you do. So thanks very much for that, and thank everybody for tuning in and listening, and also watching again on our YouTube channel. I'd also like to thank our strategic partners, BECG, for their support for today's event as well. And just a reminder that we have our COP26 preview event a fortnight on Friday the 24th of September, where we've got a great lineup of speakers who will be chewing the fat about what does the industry and indeed society want to see from COP26, a vital issue for everybody. I'm sure we'll all agree. So thanks again to Andy Mitchell for taking part today. And, thanks to everyone for listening and logging on. This is me, Andy Walker, from Infrastructure Intelligence, thanking you all and signing off. Thanks very much indeed.